Hello and welcome to today's History Hack. We always say we're excited, don't we, Charlie?
We do.
We do. And it's generally true, but we are actually very excited today because it's one of our besties is back. One of our favourite guests is back today. Before we get to that, we have to do the housekeeping. We're sorry, but, we need to eat and feed cats and generally adult and buy things that prevent us from living under a bridge. So if you like what we do, you can spot us a coffee or a gin and tonic or however you want to phrase it with a one-off donation at Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/history hack. If you really like us and you want us to say us in your prayers and stuff, and you want special presents from Chris, because this is a new thing, each tier features a gift from Chris in some way, and they range from Chris reading out a message on air to sending you locks of his hair, which we're marketing as a limited time only because it's falling out. God love him. So if you want stuff like that, go have a look at Patreon. It's patreon.com/history hack. Also, you get special content, and today, I think special content is going out, Charlie. I know what day this episode is going out. We've definitely just released a shiny private episode for people about ancient Rome, and it's Simon Elliott, who is another one of our regulars and absolutely lovely. So you can do that. Visit the new website as well, www.historyhack.co.uk. There will be merch up there as soon as our favourite beardy weirdo cartoonist figures out how to put it up there, so you'll be able to buy things with all manner of his illustrations on and History Hack quotes, such as Kit Chapman's finest, Charlie. This would be funny if so many people hadn't died.
I mean, it's perfect. Perfect.
It is. It's completely on brand, the new website. It's very loud, very bright, and fun. So, without further ado, let's stop trying to sell you shit and make a living and justify to our advertisers our existence and introduce today's guest. Who have we got?
We've got a repeat offender in a way, because our guest today was a guest recently on the After Hours podcast, which is on your wonderful Substack, Alex.
Yay! So she was talking about boinking then.
She was talking about boinking because that's kind of all we do. And if there's ever any reason to sign up to your Substack, it's to hear you and I talking to expert guesses, about boinking in a scholarly way.
Yeah. No regrets at this end. Don't know about you.
It's definitely a theme. So today we've got Dr. Gabrielle Storey, Gabby. She's a historian specialising in medieval queenship, monarchy and sexuality, all the good things. And she's here today to tell us about another slightly forgotten, overlooked medieval queen. Do you think that's fair, Gabby?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm afraid to say there's considerably less boinking in this episode, so apologies if you've just turned in for a bit more sex. Not so much fun today, but
I suppose we have to add on at some point, right, to justify all the boinking.
Well, look, I mean, you covered plenty of boinking with Eleanor of Aquitaine, so that's fair. You've done your bit for the boinking effort. But we're going to be talking about a member of her extended family, and I'm going to let you introduce her because her name, even her name itself, is it pronounced one way or another way? So who are we talking about today?
So we're talking about Berengaria of Navarre, who's Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter-in-law and Richard the Lionheart's wife. And some people will say Berengaria, some people will say Berengaria. I think I'd go with Berengaria, and that is how I believe the Cypriots pronounce it, which is where she ended up getting married. So that's kind of how I've stuck with it. But she's got one of those names which isn't immediately familiar to us as a Anglophone audience anyway, so it's kind of adds to that illusion of who she was in the first place. But yeah, she's a fascinating figure to me, so I'm really looking forward to talking a bit about her. So we'll go with Berengaria, but all other pronunciations welcome.
Okay. Yeah, it does sound like the less pretentious version, doesn't it? I feel like saying Berengaria, I feel like a complete knob, so I'm glad you've opted for that one. So start from the beginning, I guess, then. So Cyprus for this one. How does she end up in Eleanor's orbit? Who is she? What do we know about her?
Yeah, so she's what we call an infanta or a Spanish princess. So she's born to Sancho VI of Navarre, which is a region in northern Spain just across the border, and his wife Sancha of Castile. As with a lot of kind of medieval children, even the royal ones, we don't know that much about their early lives. She's got a couple of siblings, her brother Sancho, who also becomes king. So the Navarrese are no different to the English in that case when it comes to naming their sons after their fathers and having dozens of them. And the most other prominent sibling, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is her sister Blanche or Blanca, who becomes Countess of Champagne. But
Ooh.
really, it's, kind of not humble beginnings, but I guess quiet beginnings in terms of we're not really sure where she stayed when she was in Navarre. There's a couple of major cities like Estella and Olite and so forth where she may have resided. We know she's near Montreal, which again is another royal site around 1185 because that's the main bit of evidence we have for her. But up until her marriage for Richard, we don't really see that much of her.
Is she like, I mean, I'm thinking about, because, you know, I look at a lot of early modern women. Is it the same with medieval women, that even when they are hugely important, you know, she's not a poor woman, that their early life, they just sort of appear because no one really bothers to mark down when they were born. Nobody really takes any interest in their childhood because, you know, they're just little girls, and their letters don't tend to survive because they're just women writing about women's things and it's not important. Would you say, is that sort of what we're finding with Berengaria as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite a, common idea that women turn up in the chronicles for births, marriages, and deaths, and a bit of scandal otherwise. Other than that, it's rarely kind of like the life moments where we see them. So she does pop up for various other things, but outside of the chronicles, you'll be looking for the documents to prove what she's up to otherwise. And like you say, letters can be really useful when we do have letters from her later on, but again, it is just a real scarcity of evidence, even while she's queen as well, to be fair.
So what do we know about her in the run up to her marriage? So this is where we're gonna find her. This is where she's going to become, you know, important to us if we're doing the Anglo-centric view of history. What do we know about her in the build up to that marriage to Richard I?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different kind of rumours or kind of myths, I suppose, in terms of how this marriage comes about. So one really romantic myth that was put about by a poet, therefore not surprised it's romantic, I suppose, is that Richard met her when he was a young count and fell in love with her across the court and then decided that he had to marry her. And that's kind of what kicked it all off. It's much more likely that Richard sees Navarre as an important kind of geographical alliance because he's looking for a region, an ally that can protect the borders of Aquitaine whilst he goes off on crusade, because France at this point is still very much a kingdom with lots of warring counts and nobles around it. So Richard's got to think strategically about, whether he's going to marry the French princess who he's been engaged to for 20 years at this point. So throwing an alliance with Berengaria there is going to put a spanner right in the works, as we'll see in a little bit. But yeah, and there's also some ideas that maybe Eleanor was kind of not interfering, but orchestrating the marriage. But whether it's Eleanor or whether it's Richard, the main kind of nub of it is that it's because it's an important strategic alliance for Richard as he goes off on crusade. So, yeah, we know that Navarre, at least Berengaria, is important for Richard as he's going on crusade. We know that when Richard goes off on crusade, he then has to break the news to his supposedly best bud at the time, the King of France, Philip, that he's no longer going to marry his sister, who he's been engaged to for 21 years by the time we're on crusade, who's been...
How did that go down?
Not well, to be fair, really. Poor Alice, who's been also living in England for the best part of 20 years at this point, and was rumoured to have been the mistress of Richard's father, Henry II, though, again, not really much foundation in that. But, yeah, so poor Alice has been kind of left on the sidelines all this time, expecting to maybe eventually be married to Richard, and he's now cast her off in order to marry Berengaria, and it's going to create really tensions between the French and the English forces whilst they're on crusade, because you've now gone from having like your little bros on tour kind of thing going on to absolutely like...
This is like when people go on the 8-month travel thing. Charlie's son just did this. The two guys going off on like around the world gap year, and then one of them meets a girl, and it all goes to shit, and all the fun is over. And then what does the girl want to do, and where does she want to travel? And it's like, ugh. But also as well, I do get the feeling my vibe off Richard the Lionheart, which Gabby knows full well is based on Sean Connery in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, turning up for 5 seconds at the
or
end.
the lion
is,
in,
yeah, sucking his thumb and crying for his butt. That's John, isn't it? Yeah. Either way, that's the limit of my knowledge, and Gabby knows that, and she finds my ignorance charming, I think. But I get the sense that he's a dick anyway. Like, is he not just the kind of man that just is not overly thoughtful anyway, and is quite... that's the sense I get from him, is that Richard does what Richard wants to do for Richard.
Yeah, I think that's quite a general but a fair assumption, because he's not interested in being a king, and I find it difficult.
He's not interested in England, is he, either?
No, he's not. He's very much a soldier. He's very much concerned with the kind of glory and victory of being on crusade and then campaigning in Normandy when he comes back. He's not concerned with being a king, apart from the potential advantages it gives him in terms of authority and revenue and so forth. So I think it's, without being too psychological about it, it is difficult to assess him as really a good king, because we don't see him as a king. We don't see him as a particularly good husband to Berengaria. We don't see him as a particularly good king of England. He is a good soldier. He is very heroic and all the kind of myths that come with it. And he is a good son, I suppose, in terms of a personal relationship with Eleanor. But he's not the greatest.
Before we head back to the point of this and like stop talking about the men, do you know what he is good for? Collecting bits, because he's in several bits, isn't he? And I've got 2 out of 3. So I've visited where most of him is, and I've visited where his heart is. I've yet to get there's a stray arm somewhere that I haven't yet visited in France, but I'm collecting him as I travel further away from First World War battlefields in France. But anyway, let's talk women. We're here for women, aren't we?
Yeah. So Berengaria does have a bit of an adventure in terms of getting to Richard in the first place. So Eleanor goes to Spain, goes to Navarre to collect her. They travel overland, so through France, Germany, through to Italy. They end up in Reggio on the south coast of Italy. Berengaria goes to Sicily, where she then meets Richard's court, including his sister Joanna, and they then decide to travel onwards to Cyprus. Now, Berengaria and Joanna are shipwrecked just off the shore of Cyprus. So this is before she's even got married, before she's even spent much time with her husband. She's already being cast into the throes of the throes of the sea, so to be fair. So she's not off to the best start for this kind of union with the English, because she's already facing some peril, which is obviously quite a dramatic moment in terms of her then popping back into the historical record. But Richard comes to the rescue. Joanna and Berengaria manage to kind of hold off being made to go ashore to Cyprus, where there's a bit of a tyrannical Emperor Isaac waiting for them, who wants to use them as hostages. So after Berengaria has this really, dramatic moment of shipwreck, her and Richard are safely in Cyprus. Richard takes control of the island, supposedly maybe makes himself Emperor of Cyprus as well, because who needs another title at this point? And and they then get married in Limassol on Cyprus, and you can still kind of see her legacy there. Like, they have the Queen Berengaria Military School, they've got Queen Berengaria Street and Hotel run by Limassol.
I'm laughing at her destination wedding. Yeah. Hey guys, Cyprus.
And everyone else is like, Oh my God, they're getting married in Cyprus. I mean, it's
Oh,
gorgeous,
it's going to take it out my
so
holiday.
much money, and they're going to want a present. Oh my goodness, I've got to get someone to look after the cats. Dear me.
Yeah, selfish
Selfish.
destination wedding.
But glorious, of course, at the same time. Do they have a happy marriage? Because I'm seeing, because I'm a hopeless romantic, the rescuing her from the shipwreck and the evil Isaac wanting to take her hostage, and this all seems quite romantic, but I don't know. He's a crusader. Does she go with him? Is she like a camp follower? How does their marriage work, and is it happy?
In terms of how it works, so she does go with him on the Third Crusade, so they do make it to Acre and Jaffa and so on. So it's not like she's immediately on the front lines fighting, but she is in camp. She is staying in castles where there's castles nearby and so on with Joanna, and undertaking daily life as far as they can in terms of like gaming or composing poetry and all the kind of traditional stuff we associate with courtly households at this point. But we don't really know how much she sees of Richard day in, day out. They never have children, so whether that is due to lack of boinking time, when they come back from Crusade, certainly they don't spend a lot of time together. Whether it's due to sexual inclinations on one or both of them, just personal disinterest or fertility issues. Like there's a variety of reasons why they may not have had kids. But again, it's difficult. Richard rarely is a soldier, so is he always going to put that above having a happy marriage? He doesn't seem concerned with getting an heir in order to secure the dynasty at any point. Maybe he thought he had much longer to live, but
Or perhaps, like you heard it here first, people, Richard the Lionheart, biggest dude in history, erectile dysfunction. It happens to many, many people that you wouldn't expect.
That's it. Help is available. It is interesting because I look at Richard the Lionheart and that family situation. And when we talked about Eleanor on After Hours, we talked about her sons and the not playing nicely and all of that sort of stuff. Do you think maybe there's an element of Richard who's like, I don't need to do a damn thing to secure this dynasty because I've got enough bloody brothers who would kill me quite happily for this crown. I'm going to go do my crusade, go to heaven and have a lovely time.
Yeah, it's like Richard does what Richard wants for Richard.
Yeah, so he does have a bastard child, and he does have content warning, rape women whilst he's on crusade. So we do know that he is sexually active to a point, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But obviously, one bastard child doesn't necessarily mean that you're always completely fertile. Again, we don't know whether Berengaria may have been infertile. She doesn't remarry. So again, it's perhaps more of an impression that they don't spend a lot of time together. It's not a particularly happy marriage. Berengaria, when she comes back from Crusade, is left in one of the kind of Angevin dominions on the continent. We're not entirely sure where she is either. So yeah, we really don't get that impression of a kind of devoted husband and loving husband, that kind of happy marriage by any sense. And yeah, I feel sorry for her. I know some other people might kind of think, oh, maybe she was a bit of a harridan. Maybe she was nagging him all the time and he didn't want to spend time with her. And that's why it wasn't.
Yeah. All 1950s history books written by men went down that road.
Yeah, but yeah, I do. I feel sorry for her.
So he can't be blamed.
Yeah, it's difficult really to think how she would have felt. Remember, she's at a foreign court. She's not got really much of her own household with her, if at all. She does have this strong kind of companionship with Joanna whilst they're on crusade, but she doesn't have, those networks, those opportunities. She doesn't have money given to her by Richard to enable her to survive and really set up her own court in that way. So it's, again, maybe some of this evidence has been lost, but it's really difficult to get an impression that she was going to be happy in this new marriage because she is left alone for the most part.
It's a very different sort of version of a queen consort, because you imagine, you look at medieval queens consort and their role as almost like a conduit to the king for people and his softer side. So if he's going to forgive anybody, maybe they would appeal to the queen, and then he could say that it was the queen's kind heart that has led him to to make these decisions. But they don't have, if she doesn't have a court and a presence and all of those kind of normal day-to-day functions, she's a very different animal, isn't she?
Definitely, and there's two issues there because of that. So firstly, she is crowned queen, but she's crowned queen in Cyprus, which is away from the English, away from most of their court, so she doesn't have that visibility of being crowned queen in front of her subjects. And Richard is crowned for a second time when he comes back from crusade at Winchester Cathedral, and that is a really good opportunity for him to introduce Berengaria, and he doesn't. He has Eleanor by his side. And throughout Richard's reign, it is Eleanor who's, being the main queen still. She is a widowed queen. She's dowager queen at this point, but she's still the one who's very involved in the government, in politics, who's going around securing money for Richard, holding up alliances and so forth. She's very active. She's doing all the things that we might want to see Berengaria doing.
Wow. So we already have a queen. We don't need this new queen. His mum's doing the job. I mean, that's so much to unpack.
Yeah, it is. And it's, again, there's space for Berengaria, he could have very tactically said to Eleanor, look, you focus on Aquitaine or you focus on this, on the continent, which Henry II did with his mother, the Empress Matilda. He used both Eleanor and Matilda to rule. But Richard doesn't seem to do so. He just seems to have Eleanor kind of front and centre to do things for him.
If you ask a bloke who is the most masculine, manly man in the history of the world, they might go, Richard the Lionheart. Can't knock his wife up. Has to rape people because can't get consent, and his mum does everything for him. I'm less and less impressed by the minute with Sean Connery at this point.
This reflects badly on you, Sean.
Yeah, you should have done your due diligence before you took. Oh, he's dead, isn't he? Yeah, he should have done his due diligence before he took this role. Because I feel like I'm having a Me Too moment with Richard the Lionheart live on air at this point. I'm like, what douche, what absolute douche.
But again, all the depictions we get of Richard are either him on crusade when he's at his best, politically speaking, or however else, or focusing on the fact that he's on crusade and therefore pops up again for 5 minutes at the end, whether that's Sean Connery at the end of Prince of Thieves, whether that's the lion popping up when Robin Hood gets married in Disney. And
now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, how? So he turns up to give Marion away in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, doesn't he? And I know it was edited by Kevin Costner, and he shut the actual editor out of the suite with the director and ran amok, basically. I'd love to see what they wanted the film to be. But how does he not turn around to Sean Connery at the wedding in his American accent, which is just so random, and go, "Oh, you turned up then? I've sorted your kingdom for you, mate. Don't worry, it's safe." I mean, giving her away doesn't really cut it. I'm sorry, but there needs to be some financial recompense, and there needs to be some PR telling everyone how awesome I am. There needs to be a chronicle talking about the awesomeness of me, frankly, because without me, you wouldn't be here.
At least say sorry.
Yeah, at least say my bad. Took a wrong turn on the way across the channel and ended up in Ipswich.
Charlie's having a breakdown now.
I've completely gone off the subject now, and I'm thinking, how can we orchestrate the cartoon so that it's the three of us and this is Richard basically punking him in the artwork for this episode?
Can we all be foxes?
Yes, we can all be foxes, and Yeah, we need a reference, don't we? Maybe he can be like hanging from the nearest tree because he's a rapist, but Sir hisses the
Okay,
noose.
this is getting really dark, but let's bring it back. Let's bring it back. So Richard does die eventually.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, what happens to Berengaria after he's died? I mean, is she suddenly like, I'm free and can go and live her life, or what happens to a medieval queen consort with no children at this time when a king dies?
Yeah, so because she doesn't have children, there's options shut off to her because, if you have a son, particularly a royal son, particularly one that then ends up being king, that's still your kind of avenue to power. You can still try and get money, have a presence at court, and so on and so forth. So not having children really does cut her off some more. I do think she's at Richard's funeral. She appears at Fontevraud shortly, Fontevraud Abbey, where Richard is buried, minus his heart, and as it turns out, a stray arm. So, so Berengaria is there shortly after his funeral to try and negotiate, to try and make her presence still felt, and the fact that she is still owed money at this point. She then disappears off again the historical record for a little bit, and we kind of call that period between 1199 and 1204 like lost years because we don't really know where she is. I think that she is at the court of her sister Blanche in Champagne. So Blanche becomes Countess of Champagne in 1199. Berengaria is at the wedding, and Blanche's husband, Thibaut, died in 1201. So I think from that point onwards, Berengaria is likely in Champagne because she doesn't have money to support her with her own household still at this point. I think it's likely that from this close relationship we see later on that the sisters are together. Berengaria then pops up again around 1204, and we see her become Lord of Le Mans. And this means she's got her own city, she's got this own area where she can rule relatively independently when she does homage to Philip, King of France, every now and again. And that's where she stays for the rest of her life. And this is really where we see her come into her own. She doesn't disappear from the political scene from this point onwards. We see her acting as a lord. She negotiates with the nobility. She interferes with the church where she can, which does bring her into a lot of dispute. But we see her really growing in confidence, growing into her own person and being independent. She doesn't get married again. I don't think she sees the need to once, or perhaps she doesn't want to after her first marriage, and therefore has the ability to remain independent. And I find it is the time where we have the most evidence for her, but I think that just makes it all the more interesting because she's not shied away, she's not retired, she's not gone to really be remained forevermore not in the history books. We can see so much more of her character, of her determination, of her capabilities because she can exercise power, and she does exercise power. She really does become someone to be reckoned with locally because she's determined to assert her own rights and get what she's due. And we see this for the rest of her life. She continues to write these letters to John, to his son Henry III, to the papacy, asking for money, demanding that she gets what she's owed. And she probably becomes quite a pain in the arse, to be honest, because, the English crown has lost a lot of its land in France. They're losing financially with the cost of bearing all these wars, and they can't really afford to pay her. But she keeps coming back, give me what I'm due. Give me what I should have been given during Richard's reign, at the very least. And it's really difficult for them to uphold all of that.
God. I mean, yes, she must have been difficult. I mean, are they obligated to her then? Do they do still owe her, the family?
Yep. So when she gets married to Richard, she's assigned what's called dower, and that meaning changes a bit during Berengaria's time and afterwards. But at Berengaria's point, it's land that she should have money from while she's queen and afterwards. Now, we have the slight issue during Richard's reign that Eleanor's still alive and wants that dower, wants that money. Once Richard dies. John then has a second wife, Isabella Ronguilhem. She's also owed dower. So it's the fact that you've got 3 women from 1200 to 1204 that are all owed dower, are all owed recompense, and it's difficult to kind of balance it out. So they're assigned different amounts. Once Eleanor dies, that should make the situation easier, but then John's lost the land in France, so they should be thinking about giving them something money-wise, like actual cash-wise. And this is kind of what they promised to do. So John Dud and Henry III both write letters saying, right, we'll pay you X amount of money at the Easter and Christmas courts. But she still doesn't get it. And, you know, the last correspondence we have is in 1226. So she's been asking for this money for about 30 years at this point and still hasn't got all of it. So it's a real kind of campaign of like stubbornness, determination, pig-headedness, whatever you want to call it. She will not let up on getting this money.
I don't blame her, to be honest. I love that she's a bit of a problem child because I think, frankly, she's been through quite a lot. We've established that Richard might be a complete dick as well, and she's put up with him. I love that there seems to be this feisty streak to her as well. What else do we know? I always ask you this, and you always have to give me that sad answer. Like, Alex, this is in the 20th century, and there's not loads of printed, typewritten documents. What do we have anything in her own words? Do we know anything more about her personality?
Yeah, so what we do know comes from these letters, really asking for money, asking for help from the papacy to do this. Otherwise, not so much in terms of what else comes out of her personality and so forth. It's really about the finances for her. We can get a sense from her interactions locally that, again, she's a very determined woman. She's very determined to kind of get her dues financially, because that's very important to her, where she is impoverished for much of her kind of early widowhood. But we just get, I think, a sense of character from her. Yeah, feistiness, determination, capability. She can act as a lord. She can intervene in other disputes. But we don't get a sense of, shall we say, love towards Richard, that kind of honouring of, memory in a very devoted way or so forth. We can see later grants are made for his memory, but we don't get that kind of same sense of devotion that we might see with some other medieval queens in terms of, regular visits to the tomb and all this other kind of perpetual alms being made in the same way. So it's difficult to get much more of a sense of what she felt and how she operated. We don't have diaries, we don't have an extensive amount of letters as we might get for other queens, or indeed as time develops and records develop and we get much more surviving. So I think if we think about her relationship with Richard's family as well, it's just one of constant tension, constant argument and disruption and everything else.
Amazing. So your book about Berengaria is out in June, probably now. I'm looking at my diary and realising what today's date is. What are some of the myths about her that you've tried to dispel in the book? Because I'm guessing you must have come at it with a, right, let's set the record straight here agenda. What do we got?
Yeah, so one of the big myths is that she never comes to England. So she doesn't come to England while she's married to Richard, but she does pop back up on the scene in 1220 at Canterbury when Thomas Becket is kind of transferred to another part of his remains, and relics are transferred to another part of Canterbury Cathedral. So she's there for that. Shortly afterwards, we then have another letter issued from Westminster regarding her dower. So I think it's very likely she then goes to London to meet with Henry III and his court, and again to kind of persist around this issue of her getting what she's due. So she does come to England eventually for a very short period of time, around July 1220. but that's not going to have a huge impact because, again, she's not crowned in front of her subjects. They don't know who she is. They don't know her importance. Again, she's not mother of a king in any sense in the way queens usually are, so she may not have made a considerable impact. But that myth that she never comes is that she does come, just not while she's married to Richard. In terms of other myths, I think...
Sorry, I love that. Hold the press. This woman was not defined by the man she was married to. Hurrah!
Yeah, she's so much more than Richard, and I think it's difficult because, like, the selling point of her in a sense is that she's a Queen of England, and that is the point where we've just not got all that kind of resource, all that evidence for her. But she is so much more because she has power in her own right when she becomes Lord. She becomes a lord. She becomes a woman to be reckoned with, who can exist independently of a man. And she does so, and she does it well for the rest of her widowhood. And that's the other myth. Is she forgotten? Is she a shadow figure? Why don't we know more about her? Well, we don't know more about her because everyone stops paying attention to her when she's no longer queen and doesn't think about her. She doesn't appear important to the English because she wasn't there. She wasn't Queen of England. She doesn't feature. Her family in Navarre, her brother, he doesn't really think about her as much as far as the evidence tells. He's not involved in negotiating another marriage for her. He's not financially supportive. He doesn't care. She doesn't go back to Navarre. So it's only really in France where they pay a bit of attention to her and think about her. And she's not a shadow. She's really very much on the political scene in terms of her negotiations, in terms of her work, in terms of being an active lord in the community in Le Mans. And to her, to Le Mans, she's a local heroine because that's her home. That's where she sets up the rest of her life. It's where she's actively involved, and she found her own abbey there, Le Pau, which is on the outskirts of Le Mans. So she leaves a lasting legacy to the community. And I think for me, like, Berengaria is about more than just politics. She's about more than just being a figurehead, whether that's an actual one or a symbolic one. We get a sense of what it's like to be a woman, to be a sole woman in the Middle Ages, and the fact that we have got loads of other women out there as well who are making their own mark on their communities, who are making their own mark in history. But because it's not with a massive bang and wallop, it's not necessarily something that gets picked up by the writers. You do have to go and kind of comb through the archives, and I've spent a lot of time in French archives really combing through, looking for those documents as well, to give us a sense of what was important to her, to the fact that she does have this relationship with her sister Blanche as well, which really does mark her widowhood as a time of kind of sisterly closeness as well. So we get so much more from her from that later period of her life, where we think of women who, as they get older, as they become widows, they should disappear from the political scene and never be heard of or seen again. We just have this kind of fixed idea of retirement, but that's so not the case. She comes into her own, and so do so many other women. When we think they're not at court, they're not important, absolutely not. They're still working, they're still achieving things, they're still operating. I feel like I've been ranting for about 5 minutes now.
I love how passionate you are about this.
What's interesting about her, and I think you've nailed it with what you've said today, is that she had more power and influence as a lord than she did as a Queen of England. And doesn't that say something about, the position of women, that you could even be the top of the pile, a queen, and you're better off being a lord and looking after your own stuff. So I think that's been really interesting.
Definitely. There's much more you can learn. And I mean, I'm not dissing Queens because that is where my love has come from. But actually it's what they are outside of a queen sometimes as well that can help tell us so much more. If you look at the next level down in society, if you look at noble women, we can unpick a lot more about female power as well. So look at queens, look at noble women, look at them as they are in those different roles, as they are in comparison with one another. But you can pick women out. You just need to go and do that bit of digging. And Berengaria is someone we don't have loads of evidence for, but we can still tell that story.
Gabby, thank you so much. Your new book is an absolute triumph. I'm on a mission to find you a spot somewhere this summer to tell everybody about it. Tell everyone what it's called. I really hope it does well.
Yeah, thank you. So it's called Berengaria of Navarre, Queen of England, Lord of Le Mans. It is published on 3rd of June, and I'm having a book launch to celebrate it as well. So I hope you all see lots of photos across socials of the book, which you can buy anywhere in the world. It's on Amazon, it's on Routledge website. There is a discount as well if you buy it from Routledge. So please do run back to the internet and get hold of it.
Yeah, I just love seeing you do well, because you love this so much and you put your heart and soul into it, and you clearly love her as well. And I love her as well, because I don't like Richard, and he doesn't squish her into dust, and I like that, Charlie. I don't know about you.
Definitely. Strong women. We're always here for them. Thank you so much, Gabby.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute blast as ever, and I'm always happy to convert more people to Berengaria.
Well, that was another fabulous conversation, wasn't it? Thank you so much to Gabby for joining us and telling us all about Berengaria. Do check out her book, because it's going to be wonderful. Now, just to wrap off this episode, I'm going to ask you for some money. If you would like to subscribe to our Patreon account, we're on patreon.com/historyhack. And if that's a little bit out of the budget, because believe me, I completely understand, we've also got a Ko-fi account, so ko-fi.com/historyhack. You can just drop us a tip. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you've enjoyed hearing about women who've perhaps been a bit left out of history, drop us a couple of quid. That's all it takes, and believe me, it helps. Now, for you and for your effort and for listening for so long, I've got a little recommendation. As you know, I like stuff. I like movies, books, music, anything like that. So I'm going to share one of my recommendations with you. And this time I want to recommend a book. It's called The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, this is the author who wrote Daisy Jones and the Six. So if you enjoyed that on Amazon, or if you read that book, because I know that it was quite a big success, then I think you'll enjoy this. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is about an actress, a Hollywood actress, and she is married, you guessed it, 7 times. What's really clever about it is that it really picks stories out of Hollywood history. And every now and then you'll be reading it and you'll think, oh, that sounds like Liz Taylor. I mean, obviously the multiple husbands, you're thinking Liz, aren't you? But you'll think, oh, that sounds a bit like Joan Crawford and her relationship with Betty Davis. There is so much in there if you love Hollywood history, right down to, ooh, he sounds like Irving Thalberg. And there are points for you if you know who Irving Thalberg is, because then we can be friends. It's a fantastic book. You're going to enjoy it. And if you don't cry at the end, then you're probably made out of stone. So check it out. 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is my book recommendation for you guys.